I sentence you to hang by the neck until you are dead. An execution method from the medieval times. Well, not in today's story. Now take a trip with me to the gallows as we untangle the case of Billy Bailey, the last man hanged in American history. And the year will shock you. Welcome to The Last Supper. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of The Last Supper, a true crime podcast. My name is Colson Davis and I'm an amateur chef, a true crime junkie, a music and video producer, and a content creator. Every other week on this podcast, I'll be telling you a true death penalty case story, and at the same time, I will be cooking that criminal's last requested meal before they were executed. This week, we're looking at Billy Bailey, the last man hanged in American history. His last meal consisted of a steak cooked well done. I'm gonna be honest, I can't cook a steak well done. I'm not doing it. No. The steak cooked well done with steak sauce, buttered rolls, a baked potato with sour cream and butter, peas, and vanilla ice cream. You can find all the recipes I've written for the podcast at lastsupperpodcast.com/blog. Now, I'd like to also shout out the Country Butcher in Clearfield, Pennsylvania and Woodland again for giving me these delicious looking ribeye steaks for today's episode. These things are beautiful. Go visit the Country Butcher in Clearfield and Woodland. They have the highest quality meats, delicious hoagies, and tons of other stuff. Great staff members. They are amazing. Go check them out. Now, let's dive into the story of Billy Bailey. Billy Bailey was born in 1945 in South Carolina, and he was the 19th of 23 children. His father never abandoned any of the children, and he had kids with 4 different women throughout his life. When Billy was born, his father was with the 3rd woman, but unfortunately, when Billy was less than a year old, his mother passed away, leaving Billy with his father, new stepmom, and his 7 brothers and sisters who were around at the time. Their upbringing from a very young age was described as utter filth and poverty. The father couldn't provide more than a 2-room shack with no plumbing to shelter his children, and his stepmom would beat Billy and call him worthless according to social workers. This was normal living until Billy turned 10 years old, and in this year his father passed away, and quickly after this the stepmom abandoned the children, giving them away to other family members or the foster care system. Billy was placed in several different foster homes from ages 10 to 14. At some point in this time, Billy went to live with one of his half-brothers and his wife in Wilmington, Delaware. But this wasn't much better for Billy. At least there was some more space and plumbing though. The household was very disciplined. Billy would get beaten for the smallest things, and he was deprived of food. During this time, when Billy was around 12 years old, he developed a severe drinking problem. The couple got tired of dealing with Billy, and he was eventually sent to the Governor Bacon Health Center. A psychologist said that Billy was basically way too fucked up physically and mentally to consider putting him in a foster home. However, here they would throw Billy in a locked room and feed him, quote, yellow gunky stuff and medicine. Billy later stated that when he asked for help with his seizures, the counselors would call them temper tantrums. Overall, a traumatic and cruel childhood for Billy so far. He was released from the health center assumingly when he was 18, and he was quickly known to the police as a thief and a fighter. In 1966, when Billy was 21 years old, he was arrested for disorderly conduct because he was running around the main streets of Dover, Delaware with a rifle, which severely disturbed traffic. He was arrested again the next year for grand larceny for committing a theft in a Dover restaurant. He was then arrested for the burglary of a Dover home in 1968, and he's clearly escalating his crimes. In 1970, he met and married Susan Hughes. She was 19 years old and Billy was then 25 years old, and she somehow stayed with Billy until 1989 after he was later convicted. They had an infant daughter who was 3 months old, and Billy was excessively drinking more and more. His small family was living in a mobile home, and one day a fire somehow broke out and Billy managed to save their daughter and get her out of the home, but unfortunately her hand was so badly burned that it had to be amputated. Billy's in-laws blamed him for the fire and the injuries the child had sustained, Billy describing it by saying they, quote, put the bad mouth on him. They prevented him from seeing his own daughter, and his drinking only increased. At the same time, Billy had a brother who he was very close to, and he unfortunately passed away. Billy described it, quote, one day he drank himself a pint of whiskey straight down and his heart just blew up. In 1974, Billy was arrested for stealing $1,500 worth of tools from an industrial plant, and he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was paroled after 3 years, but was arrested again in 1979 for violating parole. Along with the parole violation, he was also charged with forgery, which got him an additional 18 months in prison. At one point, Billy was in a work release program where he was on a revolving 72-hour cycle. One of the officers in this said that he still had emotional and drinking problems. He was taken out of the work program after some time because he showed back up to the prison extremely intoxicated. Because of this, he attempted to slit his wrists in prison, but it was unsuccessful. During his imprisonment, his wife Susan took off with the kids, and Billy responded by threatening to kill his daughter, wife, and her parents. He was then put back in prison because of the violation and the forgery charge. However, the forgery charge wasn't processed properly on the computer, which in turn put Billy back into another work release program. If this was just a simple parole violation, this would be okay, but the extra charge of forgery caused some issues here. The officers who realized this later said it, quote, popped up. He was then pulled from the program and was put back in the Plummer Center in Wilmington, Delaware, and he was later put back onto the work release, and he had a job opportunity lined up with his brother-in-law, Charles Coker, who sold livestock. He would live with Charles and his wife, Sue Ann Coker, and Billy would again return every 72 hours. On May 21st, 1979, Billy didn't show up at the Plummer Center for his scheduled 1 p.m. check-in. Billy instead showed up at the Coker house with a full bottle of vodka, and he told Sue Ann that he wasn't going to work or be an inmate. Billy was clearly distraught, and Charles suggested that Billy should tag along with him to do some errands, and Charles could hopefully diffuse the situation. When they were driving, Billy told Charles to pull into the liquor store, and Charles for some reason agreed to this. At the store, Reba Lovegrove, who was the cashier, watched as Billy Bailey entered the store crying. He then placed a small bottle of liquor and paid for the bottle. When Reba looked back up to give back the change, Billy was holding a .25 caliber handgun, and he told her to give him all the money. Reba reluctantly refused and closed the cash register. Billy got upset and knocked Reba to the ground and proceeded to try and get the cash register open, but he fucked it up and was unsuccessful. After getting angry with this, Billy pointed the handgun at Reba and pulled the trigger, but it clicked. He then stole spare change and cash laying around and took off. Billy got in the car with Charles with a bottle of liquor in one hand and the .25 caliber handgun in the other, and told Charles, quote, police are gonna be coming soon. Billy asked Charles if he would take him to the corner of Lambertson's Corner, which was a 1.5 mile drive away, and Charles agreed, not wanting to upset Billy more. Charles watched Billy run into the woods, and Charles rushed back to the liquor store to see what happened. He called the police to confirm to them that the store robber was Billy Bailey. After Charles drove away, Billy ran through the woods into a field and was confronted by Gilbert Lambertson doing farm work. Now, Gilbert was an 80-year-old generational farmer who lived with his wife, Clara, on their large farm property. Clara was 73 years old, and the two had been married for 56 years. Gilbert grew up on the farm and worked with his father growing up, teaching him how to be self-sufficient. At this time, the couple was leasing out their land to people to garden, and they made homemade jams and jellies to give to friends and family as gifts. I think they had 4 children together, Saxton, Delbert, Mary, and Betty, who all described their parents as good-hearted people who were trying to settle down. But I think here that Mary is Mary Ann, who got married to Saxton Lambertson, making her Gilbert and Clara's daughter-in-law. But I'm not 100% certain on this. Alright, now Billy forced himself and Gilbert into the house, and after gaining entry, the couple still refused to give up their car. Billy forced Gilbert into a chair and Clara into her rocking chair and grabbed Gilbert's 12-gauge shotgun he kept by the front door and shot both of them. He also used the pistol as well, which was completely overkill. He shot Clara in the back of the shoulder with the pistol, and then when Clara put her hand over her heart, he shot her in the chest. The bullet went right through her hand. Billy also shot her in the chest and abdomen with the shotgun. Gilbert was first shot twice in the chest with the pistol and then shot in the head with the shotgun. Almost half of Gilbert's head was shot off, and the medical examiner testified that there was still plastic from the gun cartridge embedded in his brain. Mary Ann Lambertson, their daughter-in-law, was neighbors to her parents, and she saw Billy running from the house. She noticed the police helicopter and sirens in the distance, and she thought she heard gunshots. This was all suspicious, and she went over to the house to find the horrifically mutilated bodies of her parents. The police quickly converged on the prime robbery suspect, as they knew, and Officer Thomas W. Robbins, who was the co-pilot of the police helicopter, ran after Billy. Robbins quickly caught up to Billy and attempted to get him down. They fought, and Robbins managed to pin the shotgun down with his foot. As this happened, Billy took the handgun out of his waistband, turned around, and attempted to shoot Robbins, but missed. Robbins then got Billy into handcuffs, and Billy was taken away, saying, quote, "You boys got me for the store and nothing else." Billy was taken to court and was given his Miranda rights and was informed of his charges and possible penalties. These charges included robbery in the first degree, possession of a deadly weapon by a person prohibited, 2 charges of possession of a deadly weapon in the commission of a felony, and 2 charges of first-degree murder. The justice of the peace testified at trial that, quote, "During most of the proceedings, he was shouting and yelling profanities. The most remarkable was the statement I suppose he said at the end of the proceeding. I believe he first made a statement about, quote, 'You're going to put me in jail anyway. I know there is no bail for this.' I believe it was just about this time, right after the time I was reading the statute as far as penalty for the charge was concerned. He then made a statement, quote, 'Why don't you go ahead and kill me?' or 'Why don't you go ahead and hang me?' As I recall, he following that with either, quote, 'You know I did it,' or 'You know I killed them.' I'm not sure exactly what his exact words were at this point. The attorneys then asked, 'You had already read the warrant to him and that he had been charged and arrested for murder of Gilbert and Clara Lambertson. Is that correct?' Answer: 'Yes, sir, that's correct.' Question: 'Then he made that statement?' Answer: 'Yes, sir. That was after that.' Robert Collison, the Delaware State Police detective in charge of the investigation, gave some more details to this. He testified that while Billy was given his charges by the justice of the peace, Billy said, quote, 'Go ahead and kill me, you son of a bitch. I killed them. Go ahead and kill me.' And then said, 'I'm gonna make them kill me tomorrow.' When asked why he had committed the murders, Bailey could not give a reason. Quote, 'I don't really know,' he said. 'I just know that I feel bad about it. It hurts sometimes when I think about it. When I say hurt, I think about the Lambertsons and how much they hate me, and I start to cry, and sometimes I cry myself to sleep.' It was obvious to the jury what happened, and they deliberated for a little over 2.5 hours, and they found Billy guilty of all charges. Billy, at the young age of 33, faced the conviction of the death penalty after the jury thought his crimes to be outrageously inhumane and vile. The defense attorneys argued for mercy. However, at one point during the sentencing, Billy stood up and started yelling at the judge and cursing him out, which really damaged his attorney's pleas. He was removed from the court while his sentence was given, and he was sentenced to be, quote, hanged by the neck until dead. He was also sentenced to 90 years for the rest of his charges. After being convicted, Billy appealed on the grounds that the trial judge didn't grant a change of venue before the trial. Billy argued that, quote, because of alleged prejudicial pretrial publicity and reversible error in the selection and impaneling of the trial jury, he believed the jury was biased due to the news coverage of his own personal case. The evidence cited included 14 articles, 8 photographs, and 2 editorials appearing in the Delaware State News, a daily newspaper circulated primarily throughout the area of Kent County. The Supreme Court judge assigned to the case trial had taken the motion under advisement. The trial judge during the preliminary hearing denied the motion due to the belief that the publicity was not so extensive or inflammatory and prejudicial as to preclude the selection of a fair and impartial trial jury. However, the trial judge did reserve the right of final decision until the jury selection process was undertaken and concluded. dead. This was denied, and on August 23, 1991, the Supreme Court denied Bailey's motion of post-conviction relief. In 1986, Delaware changed the execution method to lethal injection. However, the state advised that inmates already facing death could choose the new method or hanging. Billy refused to die by lethal injection, telling a reporter that, quote, "I'm not going to let them put me to sleep." He continued by saying, quote, "I was sentenced to hang. If I'm executed, I should hang according to the paperwork. I didn't choose hanging, the state chose it for me. Asking a man to choose how to die is more barbaric than hanging." The last chance of keeping his life was clemency, and in the papers it said that Billy was a product of his upbringing and the institutions, and that he spiraled out of control until this happened. They argued he should have more time to get better, not get killed. However, guards and prison staff mentioned that Billy had not made any significant improvement in his time in prison. Billy's execution was originally set for January 9, 1987, and the wooden gallows was built for his hanging on the grounds of the Delaware Corrections Center in Smyrna in 1986. However, the appeals process would delay this almost another decade. At this point, Delaware hadn't carried out a hanging in over 50 years. Therefore, they had to get advice from the Washington State Penitentiary for guidance on what they needed to do. They ended up using a protocol written by Fred Luther, and this stated specifically that a 30-piece long, 3¼ inch piece of manila hemp rope is needed. The rope had to be boiled to remove any stretch and coil. They then needed to lubricate the inside of the knot with paraffin wax to help the rope slide freely. They also needed a sandbag to test the trapdoor and a collapse board, which is reserved in case the prisoner won't stay still and is fighting. This would keep them bound enough for the hanging to be executed effectively. A black hood was needed to place over Billy's head, which is a tradition that dates back to the 18th and 19th centuries. The drop below would be at least 5 feet. On January 24th, 1996, Billy would spend his last day alive. On this day, he weighed 220 pounds, and this was also calculated into the hanging. He was moved from his cell into the execution chamber where lethal injections took place. Here he spent his final day talking with staff, eating, watching TV, sleeping, meeting the prison chaplain, his attorneys, and his 53-year-old sister, Betty Odom. Sometime in his final 24 hours, he ate his last meal, consisting of a well-done steak, a baked potato with butter and sour cream, peas, buttered rolls, and vanilla ice cream. A few minutes before midnight, Billy was taken into the yard and was surrounded by guards with dogs. Billy had his glasses taken away, and his denim prison-issued coat was draped over his shoulders and fastened to him with the top 2 buttons. His arms were also strapped to his sides, and the guard said that he was very calm, one of the very few times he wasn't freaking out. The 2 guards wore black jumpsuits and black hoods that were held in place by baseball caps, and they escorted Billy up the 23 stairs to the gallows platform. Here stood the warden Robert Snyder, who was the hangman, and he had a direct telephone line connected to Mr. Thomas R. Carper, the governor of Delaware, and this line was kept open until the execution was final. Billy stood there for almost 5 minutes, flanked by the 2 guards, as the 40-plus witnesses entered the compound. The one guard held Billy's left arm and faced the witnesses, while the other guard was facing Billy, gripping his shoulder. After all the witnesses were seated, Billy was placed onto the trapdoor, and his ankles were bound with a webbing nylon strap. The black hood was placed over his head and upper chest. Next, the noose was placed over the hood. Warden Snyder had to check the noose to make sure that the knot was correctly placed behind Billy's left ear, since this was the best position for the rope to snap the neck. When Billy was all prepared, Warden Snyder asked if Billy had any last words. Billy had said something, and Snyder couldn't hear him, so he said, quote, "Pardon?" Billy was obviously very confused by this and said, "Huh? No, sir." After this mess, Billy was seen squeezing his right hand into a tight ball, and at 12:04 a.m. on January 25th, 1996, Hangman Snyder pulled the wooden lever, instantly releasing the trapdoor, a sound that pierced the midnight air. Billy's body, followed by 5 feet of manila rope, snapped to a halt just above the ground. A witness had described to the Washington Post that the body was like a rag doll, swinging with his head tilted to the side at a sharp angle. Billy's body spun around counterclockwise 6 times and rotated back once. A canvas tarp was put up to hide the body, and Billy's white tennis shoes were still seen swaying underneath. A very morbid scene, some described. Billy was pronounced dead at 12:15 a.m. and became the last man hanged in American history. 150 demonstrators for and against the death penalty waited outside the yard. This was a historical moment, the first hanging in 50 years. Only 25 other people had been hanged in Delaware from 1904 to 1946, and fun fact, executions were still carried out in public until 1935. After the hanging, the victim's great-grandson, Chris Lambertson, aged 20, reportedly told people, quote, "I'm out here to see that justice is served," and, quote, "just because Billy Bailey wanted their truck, he killed my great-grandparents without a doubt, he should die." Their grandson, Dennis, had said, quote, "One of them watched the other one get blown away. They were kind, old, feeble people. My grandfather kind of wobbled when he walked." And Mary Ann proclaimed, quote, "I think it's really past time this should have come about. It's been too many years. I happened to be the poor soul who found the bodies, and it was a gruesome sight." And finally, Billy's lawyer, Mr. Lyons, described the hanging method as medieval and said, quote, "If we are proud of what we've done today, ask yourself why we do it in the middle of the night. If we are proud of what we've done today, ask yourself why we hood those who are part of the execution." And with that, Billy's sentence was served. Wow, what a case and what a meal we have here. This was nuts. The story was crazy, and I honestly feel like there's no winners in this case. Everybody was a victim. There was just shit on more shit everywhere. It was crazy, and it just kept going. It's weird how Billy just snapped at the end. Just like one thing led to another, and it led to blowing somebody's head off. It's like crazy, and you never know when somebody's gonna just snap or what somebody's past is. You gotta be careful out there. It's crazy that this case happened in 1996. The hanging, happened in 1996. That is wild. That was like 30 years ago. So yeah, really have no more information about this case for you. Let's dive into this meal. It looks delicious. I'll dive into the steak first. This looks amazing. Oh, baby. Wow, that looks delicious right there. Try some of our steak sauce here. Get some of that on there. Cheers. That is juicy, cooked perfectly. Not well done like Mr. Bailey wanted it to be, but I was not ruining this beautiful ribeye. All right, let's dive into this potato here. This is pretty basic stuff right here. A little sour cream on there, the butter and all the goodness. Dip it in some of the steak juices coming out. Look at that. Isn't that gorgeous right there? Ooh, some steak sauce on there. There we go. Got some peas here. Very basic, just some peas. Look at this juicy roll right here. Oh my gosh. The steak juice came over to it and soaked that all up. Nice and sticky with that honey butter. Honey butter on top, nice and sticky. This gives it a little bit of sweet. Super good. And the moment that I have been waiting for. This smelled so good when it was cooking. The ice cream. And look at that beautiful. Holy cow. Try it. Oh my Lord. Wow. That ice cream is so good. It's got such a vanilla flavor. It's better than any store-bought thing I've ever had in my life. The steak was juicy, delicious. The potato was just baked to perfection. It was a little crispy on the outside. Peas are they're peas, but peas are delicious. These buns, man, holy cow, those are so good. And the ice cream to finish it off. Wow, what a delicious meal we just had. What a crazy, crazy story about the last man hung, Billy Bailey. So crazy. Wow. All right, and that concludes this episode of The Last Supper. Wherever you're watching or listening, make sure you follow me or subscribe. And on most platforms, you can get me upwards of a 5-star review. I'd really appreciate that. Get the show up the charts. Also, tell your friends, tell your family. That's the best way to spread the show. If you're on YouTube, I recommend you watch this video. I think you'll really like that one. And until then, make sure you enjoy every meal, because you never know when it'll be your last.